Hello everybody, good morning again. For those of you who are just joining in this morning for this session, welcome. So I'm going to spend about the next 30 minutes having a quick chat or a look at some recipes for the blender. So basically we really don't know where we're going in September yet. Nobody can say for definite, what a classroom will look like, what learning will look like, but it's pretty sure that there will be some form of blended teaching and learning in there. We can make that assumption at this point. So I'd just like to have a chat through that. I'm going to give it another couple of minutes, just slowly there as people join in, so there's people joining, so I'm just going to give them a minute to get in there. So if you're just joining now, you're very welcome. So the aims of this webinar, what I hope to explore, I want to take a look at, what does blended learning mean as a term? What is blended learning? I also want to have a quick look at what it looks like and what that might look like in your classroom or online for learners. I also want to have a quick look at recipes for the blender. So I have a blender over here with some different ideas of what you could have in there. I want to take a quick look at how we learn. I'm going to quickly talk you through a blended learning design model. It's the DADDY model. And then I'm going to give you some prompts so that you can, for yourself, have a think about experiences of remote learning to date and how we can learn from that going forward. I suppose for me, we have huge opportunity at the moment. Some of the practices or tools that we bring into our classroom at the moment can really, I suppose, influence where we are going forward. There's an opportunity to, I suppose, improve the learning outcomes for all of our learners across all programs at the moment. And I really hope that some of the changes or practices that are brought in now will stand to us in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at blended learning. So really, it's nothing new. It's a combination of classroom teaching, online learning, looking at the strengths of both and bringing them together. I'm not for 1 second suggesting that the solution is always a tech tool, because it's not. There's huge value in the connection and the relationships that we build with our learners in the classroom, and that's so important. And that's really key. That should stay there. So in my blender here at the moment, I have books, Moodle, Teams, assessment strategies, additional learning needs, face-to-face, the teacher there in the middle with the learners also. It's so important that as much as possible, the lessons that we design, our learners are at the heart of it, but it's important that we are too, because we have to be comfortable in how we're delivering and what we're doing. And in order to learn best, well-being is so important. So it's all those things together that fit in that blender, but it has to be what suits you. It has to be what works for you. So it's really important there that we bring the best of our classroom teaching together with online learning to maximize the time that we have, because it's the time that's so important. So what does blended learning look like for you? What has it looked like for you to date? In your classroom, online, not having that face-to-face connection with your students. How has that been for you? And that's something that I want to give you a minute just to think about. For me going forward, it's about combining, I suppose, the really positive and strong aspects of our traditional teaching. So that chalk and talk, I suppose from anyone that teaches or spends time in the classroom, that is really valuable. I suppose it's our instruction, it's our direct contact with students, it's the conversations that we have, and they are so valuable. The relationships are going to be key going forward, because, to communicate and to keep learners engaged online, that face-to-face time that we get in whatever format that may be is going to be really, really important. The teaching strategies that work for you. What have you got in your toolkit to bring forward with you? whether that comes in the form of learning packs, different activities, using different tech tools, your virtual learning environment, whether that may be on Moodle or on Teams, the calls that you have using Teams meetings, you know, they're really going to be key. I just want to touch on the virtual learning environment there. I suppose that's really going to be our home for where we communicate with our learners. We arrange online meetings with them. We store their resources with them. That access to content there is going to be key. So as much as possible within a program, you know, I think we really need to look at a one-stop shop, whether that be with Moodle or Microsoft Teams. It's really important that learners on a program have a virtual learning environment to access everything in the one place. And then the beauty of the EdTech tools is they can make learning fun, engaging, accessible to all. But I suppose they can become very overwhelming for people as well. And that's something that I just want to touch on. There's so much out there. You know, there's so many tools that I still haven't dipped my toes in the water with playing with. You know, you could list, the list goes on forever of the tools that are available. I think it's important about finding ones that work for you and ones that you're comfortable with. And my top tip there is very much, you know, if you wait until you perfect or master using a particular tool, you know, it's going to be a long time before it ever gets to your learners. So have a bit of fun, try something out, you know, try something for the first time. It's okay to tell your learners that you're trying it for the first time, but just give it a go. So when we look at combining the two of these elements together, you know, that picture is going to be different for every teacher, and that's okay. You know, what works for me might not work for somebody else, but it's about finding the combination that works for you. Okay, so earlier in the year when we went to remote learning, Ken Siri, our FET director, sent out a survey. And what I thought was really positive from one of the results to one of the questions, have you been able to deliver online teaching and learning? 88% of teachers responded that yes, they had, or they had partly. That's hugely positive going forward. You know, so 88% of people at that stage, and that was early, that was back in April. You know, 88% of people at that stage had been continuing to deliver services. That's fantastic, you know, and well done to everybody that has been working so hard, you know, navigating these uncertain times, uncertain waters. And sometimes, you know, I kind of refer to remote learning as survival learning sometimes. And it's really important to me to acknowledge that everybody has been putting themselves out there, trying something new, but most of all, keeping learning open. And that's what this is about. So having a quick look, I have a 4-step menu approach to teaching, learning and assessment. With, for me, the focus, you know, if you look after learner engagement and motivation, you can always work towards learner achievement. And for me, there's 4 steps to that process. So when we look at, or when we think of learning, if we have a particular topic or area of the course that we're looking for with your learners, if you break it up into a menu approach, so there's a starter, a main course, a dessert, and then that feeds into assessment. I'm just going to look at the starter for a minute. It's really, really important to try to hook your learners in, introduce the topic, you know, grab their attention. That engagement at the start can be really critical sometimes. And, you know, there's quite innovative ways. If you look at a flipped classroom model, you can introduce the topic remotely. So you can have learners watch a TED Talk, watch a video. You know, for those of you who tried out the challenge this morning, you can create a Flipgrid Shorts video and get them to watch you at home on their phone. There's pre-reading activities that you could do. You know, look at a mind map, a photo, a KWL chart, basically something that engages them from the start and motivates them towards learning more. They're dipping their toes in the water at that stage. Moving on to the main course then, just thinking about some of the strategies or activities that you could use. And I suppose this is where that traditional teaching comes into play. So the classroom discussions, whether that be in the classroom face-to-face or online, are really, really valuable here. You know, collaborative tasks encourage learners to work on activities together. You know, you can bring in your chalk and talk, your lecture. Really, there's huge opportunity here to, I suppose, move learners from being passive in their learning, you know, to really being active. And you can encourage them to create content from themselves. Different choice board activities. You know, I suppose a lot of research is coming out at the moment where when learners have choice, they engage more in their learning. And I suppose the virtual learning environments there give us opportunities for students to work together on live documents. So there's tons of opportunities there for different activities, but it has to be what works for you and what works for your learners. And you're best placed to make that judgment call yourself. At that stage, you know, feedback or feed forward becomes really important. So whatever they're creating at that stage, you have an opportunity there to give them feedback towards moving forward. I think it's really important before learners necessarily move on to the assessment piece, that you have an opportunity there to review the topic with them. And for me, I like to call that dessert. So it could be a quiz, they could create their own small piece of content, it could be a Flipgrid video, it could be a PowerPoint presentation, you know, a reflection on their learning, a mock exam, or a practice skills demo. And that's really, I suppose, the final piece where they can get feed forward there to go and take their assessment. And assessment, I suppose, how that's going to look yet in some cases, you know, nobody has those answers yet, but it's about trying to be prepared. So, you know, having an assessment kind of plan in place, that if it's going to be a mixture between face-to-face and blended, how would you best approach that? And I think we can start thinking about that now, because we've experienced remote learning and what that's like. So if that was to be the case moving forward, you know, it's important to kind of plan ahead for that now and take a look at how that might look. But hopefully we will have classroom time back by the time September comes. So this is the learning pyramid. It's nothing new. It's been around for a long, long time. And for me, it paints a picture of exactly how I learn. And that's why I shared it up here today. You know, kind of for all of us who are teachers here, you know, when you have to teach something, you have to know your stuff. So when you teach others, you know, it kind of, you really learn from that. So there is opportunities, you know, within the face-to-face or within online classrooms, you know, to encourage learners to be peer leaders or peer mentors, or they can teach each other. You know, obviously practice by doing, you know, it's not rocket science, it's nothing new, but it's good to just take stock and look at how we actually learn. So that's why I shared that up here today. Okay, so the DADI model is a conceptual design framework for blended learning, and it gives you kind of a good starting point to look at how to go about designing a piece of learning content, you know, or a unit of learning. And for me, it starts with kind of almost the backward design model. So if you start off by defining what are the learning intentions, what are the outcomes at the end that you want your students to achieve? Then you move on to the next stage, and it's analysis. So what are the needs and expectations of the students? And that for me is really important, because that's where you bring in the additional learning needs, supports, access, and all of that is really crucial to design, I suppose, a learning platform that is accessible to students, but also so that the content is accessible. At that stage, then you would move on to the design phase. So how will the content be structured, and also how will it be assessed? And I think you need to keep that in mind through all of the design of learning, because the end goal is ultimately assessment. So that needs to be, you need to structure that so that, you know, it's always there while you're designing your learning. So development then. Develop the content, and this is the part for me that takes the most time. So what resources and learning activities are needed? you know, and if you're creating content yourself, it's very time consuming, you know, but for me it's worth it because you can reuse it. Plus there's tons of content out there on all of the learning platforms. You know, the internet is a wealth of knowledge, good content. There's tons of resources out there that a lot of the time you don't actually need to reinvent the wheel. What's the key there is just knowing where to find the good content. And during the week, I will be sharing some of that out with some ideas or some links. So how are you going to implement it then? And I suppose this is where some of the things for us will change if we're going to a blended flipped classroom model. So how will the content actually be delivered to students? And while you're also considering accessibility there and the principles for UDL. And I suppose we need to make a plan as teachers at this stage as to where we're going with this, in the sense that, you know, if it's going to be in the classroom, that's great, we can have a plan for that. But if it's going to have an element of remote learning, we also need to try to have a plan for that. And then just in case, I really hope not, but just in case we were to go back to full remote learning, I think we need to consider that at this stage as well, just in case. So that, I suppose what's key here and what I'm trying to say is that our learning content design is agile. It can change to the environment that we need to work in. Now, don't get me wrong, that is a massive, massive ask, you know, and a lot of the time at the moment, we're still finding those answers as we go. But as a teacher, I think you need to find what works for you. And that's really what I'm trying to deliver home here. And I'm 100% not suggesting that everything should be technology. It shouldn't. You know, those relationships, those face-to-face times, the time that you leave for a chat or catching up or checking in with students, that is so, so valuable. And that will be key to moving forward here into this blended learning environment. And then the last stage of the DADI model is evaluate. So were the learning intentions achieved? You know, what changes did you make? How can it inform you as you develop the next stage of your program? And what are the key points for future delivery? And at the moment, I think for me, I would switch the DADI model up a little bit. You know, if I was designing learning for the next academic year, I would really try and have a look at the evaluate stage at the moment. So how did the second half of last year go? You know, kind of were the learning intentions achieved across my course, and what could I have done better from that to inform next year's design? And then you can look at the DADI model in total then. So starting off with where am I going forward? So just to give you an opportunity to reflect on your own experiences of remote learning. What's in your blender? What does your blender look like? And there is no right answer here. You know, it has to be what works for you. And I've said that across the board, you know, and kind of the solutions are not always tech tools, but they really can help. And they can particularly help learners with additional needs who need a little bit of extra support. And that can come in the form of, you know, dictating onto a Word document or using immersive reader for a text to make it accessible. And sometimes it can even come back to just, I suppose, refining the learning content that we give to learners, in the sense that, you know, my number one motto is quality over quantity. So I like to look at my resources and really ask myself, you know, is this relevant? Should this be here? Do students need it? I suppose it's looking at maybe taking a worksheet, for example. And is it a busy sheet or is it a power sheet? You know, kind of, is it a filler or is there actually valuable learning going on this worksheet? So that's some of the kind of, I suppose, thought provokers I want to throw out there to get you thinking about where you're going, you know, to prepare for the next academic year. So what resources, strategies or approaches do you have that are working well for you and that you'd like to build on? And that's key. You know, if something is working well, there isn't always a need to change it or fix it, but you can build on it. And that's where we're going for the next year. So are there new strategies or approaches that you would like to try? Is there something that you've seen or you've heard about that you think would work really well for you? And that's something that I'm going to ask you to be open about for the next kind of week or two, in the sense that dip in and out of these sessions, dip in and out of these webinars, see if you can pick something new up and try it out, give it a go. And if at any stage you want to reach out to me, 100% go ahead. And then the final one there. So I would encourage you as much as possible to choose a topic or an area of learning that you will focus on first. You know, for me, if I was going back to the classroom in September, I would really be looking at the first month kind of, or even leading up to the October midterm. So what's the first area that you want to, I suppose, prioritize or work with your learners? And really take a look at, you know, how you're going to deliver that, but also how you're going to assess that in the first kind of term going back. And that will really kind of, it will give you a good grounding to move forward with for the rest of the year. Now, I'm just going to leave it open for questions there. I'm going to have a quick look back through what we've got. So yes, all of the webinars will be recorded and they will be available for future viewing. So don't worry about that.
How are they going to be able to view them, Ashley?
So the links to all of the webinars will be shared on the PD Hub team site. So if you're not on that, or if you're having difficulty joining that team, please do send me an email, and I'll pop my email into the chat here. And if you're having any difficulty at all getting on that, but they will all be shared through that. Okay, so very quickly, I want to throw out a quick Mentimeter there. So if you go on to www.menti.com and you can use the code 67422 and you can share your opinions there or where you're at the moment. So for the first one, I just want you to have a quick think about when you hear the term blended learning, what words come to mind for you? Okay, so just again, if you go to www.menti.com and use the code 67422. Okay, so there's lots of answers coming in there at the moment. I'm seeing technology coming in right in the middle there. So planning. Oh, I love the word proactive there. I think it's key. VLE, face-to-face combination, learning remotely, back to front. Self-directed, using different methods, on and offline. Interactive, best of both worlds. IT issues, absolutely. Yeah. Unfortunately, when you go to using technologies, I think you just have to accept the fact that you are going to have IT issues. And I suppose the key thing is that I suppose we're patient with ourselves and we're patient with others. And sometimes you just got to take it. Sometimes it just will let you down. So online videos, emails, mixed approaches, Quizlet, use of IT, Blitz, email, good preparation, learning styles, literacy levels. Wi-Fi. Isolation, I think, has been repeated a couple of times there. It's getting bigger. Hopefully from September, you know, we will move from remote learning into a more blended hybrid kind of, I suppose, situation where we will have opportunities to have face-to-face. I think it's so important for learning. You can't ever replace the face-to-face. Really interesting there. Okay, I'm just going to move on to question 2. So what strategies, resources, or tools do you have in your blender for blended learning? It's really interesting there what's coming up in the middle. That just basically means that multiple people have given that answer. So they get thicker and bigger the more people that post. So we've Teams, we've Moodle, YouTube, video, quizzes, email, patience, I love it. Our students, very important, blogs, teaching strategies, willingness to upskill. You know, I think I'm blown away at the moment by the number of people. Everybody is so open to upskilling at the moment, you know, and I think for some people it's been a case of, you know, COVID has given a gentle push to upskilling, you know, but for me that's a real positive. I think when you're learning in your own classroom as a teacher as well, you know, it can give you almost like an energy boost. You know, I'm not saying it's always easy, you know, it can be overwhelming and it can be challenging, but I suppose it can be very rewarding as well, and that's what's important. So we've TED Talks, Vimeo, HTML, Kahoot, conversations, English websites, blogs, Curiosity, pre-recorded lessons, MS Forums, YouTube, face-to-face, live feed, experience, open education materials, absolutely. Hard copy of resources, worksheets, IT skills, templates. You know, there's tons of stuff there. You know, I suppose everybody has their own approach or their own way of doing things, their own kind of teaching methods that work for them. And that's really key. You know, it's really, really important. And it's important that, I suppose, you stay kind of within what works for you. But I would really, really encourage you to try something new, you know, even if it's one thing. It can really change, I suppose, where you're going forward, in the sense that when you try one new thing, you tend to down the road try another new thing. So just give it a go. Just remember, no matter what, you won't break it. You know, so definitely give it a go. So I'm just going to come back and see if I have any new questions to take a look at. Okay, so I hope I've left you with some food for thought there on that. You know, it's kind of, for me, the big one is to, you know, I hope that I can get you thinking on where you are going with your class and your learners for the next academic year. There isn't a 100% right answer or a right way of doing this. I think the key is, I suppose, to having a concrete virtual learning environment, and then really planning out where you're going for the next year, and look at quality over quantity when it comes to content. And most importantly, what I really want to highlight is the solution is not always in a tech tool, but they can help. So thank you very much for joining in. The next session coming up at 12 p.m. will be on an introduction to using Office 365.